What I haven't talked about is how endocrine glands are stimulated to secrete anything in the first place. And the book does a really good job of outlining that for you. Endocrine glands are sensitive to blood levels of different things to be stimulated to secrete hormones. There's a neural mechanism. There's also hormones that can trigger the release of other hormones. Those are called tropic hormones, as we'll define. Well, anyways, let's go through this. This picture from the book kind of outlines 3 different ways we teach students to stimulate endocrine glands. Three ways. So if you look at the figure on the left, they show that, well, the word is humoral stimulus. Well, for us, there's the different humors of the body, like phlegm, urine. Well, blood's the main one. So if you have a blood vessel with different things in it, and then say you have a gland. We gave an example earlier today. If you had, for example, low glucose, I said the hormone glucagon could reverse that. So low glucose, that's a direct stimulus to stimulate the pancreas. And the pancreas in response would secrete the hormone glucagon to correct that. Remember, glucagon was the hormone. The other example we gave before the break was low sodium. That is a direct stimulus. It would stimulate the adrenal glands, specifically the adrenal cortex. To secrete the hormone aldosterone. There's another example I'll give later. The example is here on the slide, actually. They show a blood vessel, and they show these 4 little nodules, which are endocrine glands called the parathyroid gland. And if calcium level is low, that's a stimulus for the parathyroid to secrete parathyroid hormone to raise it back up. Calcium is very important for proper muscle function. So if you have low calcium, so I go plus because it's a divalent cation, calcium. That's a direct stimulus to stimulate parathyroid gland. To secrete PTH, which stands for parathyroid hormone. And I'll teach you the mechanism of how it raises calcium levels in another lecture, not today. But so basically, these hormones will correct that imbalance on the left. Glucagon will increase glucose. Aldosterone will raise sodium levels in the blood. And parathyroid hormone has an ability to increase calcium. The middle frame, so blood can stimulate glands, nerves can too. This is the only example you got to know. Here's an example of sympathetic efferents stimulating the adrenal medulla. Not the cortex, which is the outer part, the medulla, the inner part. Neurostimulation, we call it the fight or flight response. Sympathetics. It's a stress response. Remarkable stress. You're scared. You're running away. Some animal in the forest is chasing you, or something like that. Some remarkable thing where you need strength, you need emergency response type of a thing for the body to respond. Well, anyways, this helps that. Call it sympathetic efferents. If you remember autonomics, there's preganglionic and postganglionic, and the adrenal gland. The preganglionic fibers from the central nervous system never synapse. The preganglionics go all the way to the adrenal gland and stimulate the gland directly. So it's like the adrenal gland is the postganglionic neuron. So sympathetic preganglionics, preganglionic fibers stimulate adrenal medulla. Think of the adrenal gland on top of your kidney. And if you cut it, you can see that there's an inner part and an outer part. The outer part, what I kind of like illustrated there, that's the cortex. Cortex means bark, the outer part. The inner part, medulla means pith, the inner part, where the pit is, where the seed is in fruit. Well, anyways, in this example, that's what we're talking about there. So there's preganglionic fibers that never synapse, they go right to the medulla when you're scared, okay, in that kind of stressful situation. And what it shows you is it's secreting epinephrine and norepinephrine right into the bloodstream. Secretions. Epinephrine norepinephrine. For short, I just call it epi and norepi. If you see the word in your book, catecholamines, it refers to those two molecules. Catecholamines, write that down. Catecholamines.
On an exam, will you accept norepi or epi? Or
Yeah.
You will?
That's fine. So those are the secretions. Well, on this slide, they have a blue blood vessel. I guess it's venous blood. And those little dots are supposed to represent the epi and norepi. And when those are in your bloodstream, they circulate for a while. And all the things that you've, let me erase some things here.
You're saying that the catecholamines are the secretions, right?
Yes, and catecholamines are two things, epi and norepi.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like epi and norepi are subclasses of catecholamines. one and the same. In a fight or flight response, what do you think? Does blood pressure increase or decrease? It increases, and one of the things it does is, well, for example, if you have a blood vessel, and you squeeze it, in one location, right there, we call that, the physiology is increased peripheral resistance. If you squeeze hard right there, it's difficult for blood to flow past there. This happens very well in arterioles, which are the smallest arteries. This is one effect of the catecholamines. So if you kind of squeeze, say for example in a fight or flight response, you're not digesting Thanksgiving dinner or anything, you basically just, you don't need that. So what you don't need for an emergency response, you kind of squeeze down there. So more blood stays in the arteries, you increase blood pressure, and you can shunt that blood to like things you need, like lungs, working muscles, so you can have your fight or flight response. And, well, the word for this is called vasoconstriction. You should know that term. Vasoconstriction. Well, anyways, I want you to know that the way catecholamines increase blood pressure, you vasoconstrict your arterioles. That's why I kind of mentioned that. That's important. So there's other things, I'll mention them later. That's a big one. So the point of this was nerves stimulated the gland. That was the whole point. Okay. All right. This third example is hormones stimulating the release of other hormones. Hormones that stimulate the release of other hormones are called tropic hormones, spelled tropic. Hormones that control the release of other hormones are tropic hormones. So the term is tropic hormones. They use the example of the pituitary to illustrate this concept. And what you got to know is that if you have hormones controlling the release of other hormones, where you start, in this example, is the hypothalamus. There are neurons there that can secrete hormones. So I'll put HYP, or hypothalamus. They can affect a gland called the anterior pituitary. So I'll put ant-pit at this mid-level. And then anterior pituitary can secrete other hormones that can secrete other glands. Well, they vary. So I'll put at a third level gland. So in this example, well, in the first example, I'll give you the abbreviation of the hormones, just to be brief for now, and I'll write out the full name of the hormones later, okay? But for now, know that if you want to control the thyroid gland, which is responsible for metabolism, it starts up here in the hypothalamus. There's a releasing hormone called thyrotropin releasing hormone, we'll just abbreviate it TRH for now. Excuse me. It's secreted in a blood vessel, goes straight to anterior pituitary. There are cells in the anterior pituitary which are sensitive to TRH. Let me get some water. TRH will stimulate the release of a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. I use both acronyms and full names on tests and quizzes, so be familiar with both. And know that downstream, TSH will circulate in the bloodstream, and it'll stimulate the thyroid gland. Now, it's hard to know where this is based on this picture. It's in your neck, anterior neck. Feel your voice box, your Adam's apple. It's kind of right below there in men and women. Well, anyways, the thyroid gland, when stimulated by TSH, will secrete a hormone called thyroid hormone. We'll just abbreviate that TH for now. Well, anyways, in this example, this is the cascade of events. The thyroid hormone will get the physiology we want. So, in my example, TRH and TSH, they're both tropic hormones because they're stimulating the release of other hormones. TH is not. It affects cells to boost metabolism. Okay. All right, so the second example, they have the adrenal cortex listed there, but to control that, it starts up in the hypothalamus. There's a hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone, we'll call it CRH for now. It'll travel to the anterior pituitary to release ACTH, adrenal corticotropic hormone. That will travel in the bloodstream. The adrenal gland is located right on top of the kidney. The kidneys are where I'm touching, 12th rib, right around there. That's how I locate the kidneys in cadavers. That gland is right on top of the kidney. It affects the adrenal cortex to secrete a hormone called, well, one of them is what we talked about today, aldosterone. There's another one I'll talk about a lot called cortisol. Those are the two primary steroid hormones that I'll talk about more in another lecture, probably Thursday, I'm thinking. So in this example, the point is CRH and ACTH, both tropic. Okay, the one down here is not. All right, so your gonads, your sex hormones. They show a testes here. They could have shown an ovary. To control that, you start in the brain. There's a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone. G lowercase n, capital RH, and get that right. It's released from the hypothalamus, goes to the anterior pituitary, and well, from the pituitary, you'll get your gonadotropins. They're called FSH, LH. Capital FSH/LH. Those are two hormones. They're both called gonadotropins. You know that term? Gonadotropins. They're tropic hormones. So is GnRH. They're going to go to the gonads, ovaries or testes. Know that FSH and LH are named for what they do in female physiology. We just keep the name for male physiology. In this case, they go to the testes. And, you know, for example, they stimulate the production of testosterone. So here are 3 examples, and on each one, the top 2 are tropic. Okay, hormones stimulating the release of other hormones. So let me get some scratch paper from back here. I'm going to pass out a little half sheet of paper. Just take one and pass it to the people behind you. Just pass them around, make sure everyone gets one. Every once in a while, during the lecture, I'll kind of break it up ask you some questions to write down and turn in for credit. I call them half-sheet questions. I'll do this periodically throughout the term. We'll make this your first 4 half-sheet questions. This is a time for you to talk to each other, time for me to take a sip of water and answer that question there. I'll check back in a few minutes. Put your name, put your date, because I will enter it for, I usually give 2 points of credit for half sheets. We'll turn it in after the lecture is over. Half sheet, and look for half sheet in the grade book. I'll put today's date. Just kind of remember 1 to 4. Just kind of answer it. I don't need the question, just the answers. Because I know the question that's up here. What I'm asking you is, it's going to be 1-word answer for each 1 to 4. What's the mechanism of stimulation? Humoral, hormonal, or neural. Just read the example and put an answer. You can talk about it. It's not a quiz. Yeah. I want to check back. Sometimes I'll go over the answer, sometimes I won't. I just want to see what you put. Like I said, this will be like a couple of points for each half sheet, and they're the easiest point you'll get. If you just submit an answer, I'm not looking for correct answers, just answers like you really tried. It's really the quizzes and exams where you got to get it right. Well, anyways, okay, thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone. That's an example of hormonal stimulation. The adrenal gland is stimulated to release catecholamines by, I said it was neuro. And in fact, that is the only example of neurostimulation that I'm aware of. Low glucose stimulates pancreas to release insulin. That's this one, humoral. It's the low blood level that made it happen. gonadotropin, that's a typo, sorry, gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the release of FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Well, anyways, that's also hormonal. Okay. Well, to move on, I want to start going over the individual glands in more detail. And it starts with pituitary. I kind of like how the last slide gives some examples of pituitary, and we'll kind of like go through all the details of pituitary. It really is an important gland to study in endocrine. And we'll start with the embryology, which is the development. I don't do too much embryology in 431, but when it helps you to understand the adult structure, then it helps to spend a moment to talk about its development. So this is a picture of embryological development of the pituitary. So hold on to your half sheet. I'll probably ask you some more things to put on it later. So I'm writing pituitary development. It really starts with an upgrowth and a downgrowth that you see on the picture there. I kind of blew it up from this embryo here. Week 3, well, these pouches. One upgrowth, one downgrowth. What we'll see is that the downgrowth will become the future posterior pituitary. It's comprised of neural tissue. Future posterior pituitary. With this green one here.
That's the downgrowth?
Yeah, that's correct. And the one, the upgrowth here, this one, that is the future anterior pituitary. It's made out of epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue, anterior, I'll say future anterior pituitary. So there's two growths because they're derived from different tissue types, but we kind of study it as one gland. So you go from this picture to an adult structure. What you're looking at on this picture, I give you the page numbers for the atlas. Let's remember, when I say atlas, I'm referring to the one I use, this book. Right, so these page numbers will get you to those pictures. Let me make sure I updated the figure page numbers. Yeah, this is the 3rd edition. So if you use a prior edition, the page numbers won't work for you, but older editions are okay. If you don't get the page numbers, you got to find it yourself, which is fine. But anyways, the red arrow is pointing to it. You're looking at a sagittal section through the brain. There's thalamus, hypothalamus, there's, midbrain, pons, and there's pituitary right there. Notice that on the illustration, the gray tissue extends down to there because the posterior pituitary is neural tissue. Okay. Here is the location of it in the skull. So what you're looking at here is you remove the skull cap, and you're looking down on the cranial base. This is the superior view of the cranial base, and the location of the pituitary is in the cella turcica of the sphenoid. Let me write that down. That's where this gland is located. Sella turcica, a little depression in the sphenoid, seats the pituitary. So now I have a picture of the illustration on the previous slide next to a histological picture. And I kind of numbered it so the structure, here are the different regions of the pituitary, numbered so you can compare the histology to the illustration. Okay, so let me go through it. The main part, labeled number 1, call these pituitary regions. The anterior pituitary, or you can call it the anterior lobe. Either is fine. I tend to call it anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary, or if you want to call it lobe, go ahead. Sometimes it's referred to as that. And in a class like this, I always like to give students all the different also known as. So if you ever come across the word in your profession or in your studies, you know what it means. Because anterior pituitary is also called pars distalis. So that's another name for anterior pituitary, should you see it. Another name, it's also called adenohypophysis. Adenohypophysis, let me write it here. So you can call it any of that if you're like filling in a blank on a quiz. Adenohypophysis, pars distalis, or the anterior pituitary lobe. In fact, it's helpful to know that the pituitary is also called hypophysis. So think of hypophysis equals pituitary. The term hypophysis, hypo means below, like it grows underneath, right? It's underneath the hypothalamus, so that's kind of how it got that name. So call it either, our microscope slides call it hypophysis, so it's useful to know all the terms. Now, what are the secretions? We went over some of them. The secretions of the anterior lobe include, so let me point it out on the slide. Notice on the illustration, it's lighter colored. That's just how the illustrator decided to color it. It's called anterior because this side is anterior, that's posterior. But notice on the slide, it's flipped. It's over here on this side. And notice that when you stain it, it takes up a darker stain than this lobe. Okay, so it stains darker, and the secretions are, let me list them. That's a clue, stains dark. If you're looking at histology. Secretions are thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, abbreviated ACTH. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Those are FSH-LH. And those two are known as gonadotropins. There's also growth hormone and prolactin. Growth hormone GH and prolactin PRL. I'll tell you the functions of these hormones later. We'll just kind of get the names on the board. You write them down, start to memorize them, names and abbreviations you're responsible for. These are all the secretions of anterior pituitary. Okay. So the second region that stains light is the posterior lobe. Now, it stains light, referring to this. However, the illustrator decided to use it a dark color. So don't let the illustrator fool you. In a histology image, looking for it to be a lighter stain by comparison. If I use this picture, know that it's posterior, colored gray. Okay, so I'm going to erase all this. Number 2, posterior. Posterior pituitary or lobe is what you can call it. You can also call it pars nervosa. Or you can call it neurohypophysis. I think it called all those things. Neurohypophysis. Stains light. And basically, 2 secretions, oxytocin and ADH, which I talked about already. Remember, ADH is also called vasopressin. And oxytocin, I'll talk about it later. Those are the secretions of the posterior lobe. In addition to those major lobes, there's also what's called an infundibulum, which kind of connects it. It's a connecting stalk at least to the posterior lobe, number 3. Notice that it's continuous with posterior lobe here, right there, and here. Okay, so call that infundibulum, or you can also call it pituitary stalk. 3, infundibulum, or pituitary stalk will do. There's no secretion, it's just a connecting, there's axons that run down it to connect it from hypothalamus to posterior lobe. So technically no secretions from it directly. Now the last one, pars intermedia, it has an intermediate stain, although it didn't stain that way on this slide. And I didn't put it, well, I put it at 4 there, but they don't really show it on this slide. But it's called pars intermedia because it's intermediate to anterior and posterior lobes. And that's the only name I'm aware that it is called, number 4, pars intermedia. Has one secretion, melanocyte stimulating hormone, but I almost never test you on that, so I'm not even going to write it on the board. Let's look at this next slide to see if you can identify. Well, I have it color-coded. Pars intermedia, do you see it? It's right in the middle. And do you see how the stain is intermediate? So I'll say pars intermedia, intermediate stain. Now this is a picture I took from our collection over there. And whenever I use slides for a histology quiz, I always use it from our collection. I know I can pull images from the internet, but I'm kind of old school. I like to use what I have in this room. So when I say lab, it's from our lab collection. And what I'll do is I'll take slides from our collection, and I'll show it there, I'll present it to you, and I'll take my own pictures for you for your quiz, which is on Thursday. Well, anyways, getting back to this, this is the pars intermedia, and some students look at this and they think that's something. Do you think that's something? It's actually nothing. You know, you prepare these slides, you make these micron thick sections of tissue, and things separate. So it's kind of artifact is what we call it. But anyways, dark stain, anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary, pars intermedia. Now, do you see this little sliver there? That's the infundibulum. Do you see how this tissue looks like that tissue? Well, it's because it's the same tissue. Now, it doesn't connect all the way like it did in the previous slide because the pituitary is bulbous and the stalk is thin. So if you kind of cut off center, you're not going to get that nice continuous stalk going all the way there. You're going to get it cut off. But anyways, if you're looking for that structure during lab, look for it as a sliver on the side. So what I did here was so on your half sheet, I think we're on what, 5? We did 1 through 4. Well, 5 through 8 on your half sheet. 5, 6, 7, 8. So for number 5, identify what the blue thing is pointing to, blue arrow. And then for number 6, green arrow. 7, red arrow. And then 8, purple arrow. Just go ahead and ID 5 through 8. And I'll give you a minute. All right, we're going to move on to histology, but just check back real quick. If you're following along okay, you should have got that blue is anterior pituitary. Green, pars intermedia. What's red? Posterior pituitary. What's put for the purple? Infundibulum or pituitary stalk. So that's some histology there and identification. Let's get to the physiology, which is talking about how the hypothalamus controls the pituitary. And I have this silly happy face, sad face. They used to think that the pituitary was the master gland. It turns out the hypothalamus controls the pituitary mostly, so it's the true master. Okay, so we're going to talk about the relationships between this and that and how it controls both. It's different. And it's outlined quite nicely for your book. And they have this picture here. And we'll start with how the hypothalamus controls the posterior pituitary, pars nervosa. Call it hypothalamic control of posterior pituitary. Sometimes it helps to draw it out, and I think this one is worth sketching out. So what we're seeing here is hypothalamus, anterior lobe, posterior lobe. Okay, that's what I'm going to try to sketch out on the board. So to give you some landmarks, pretty much above the dotted line, I'll say HYP for hypothalamus that you got there. Pretty much from here to here, between the dotted lines, is infundibulum. And pretty much below the dotted line, this is all meant to be pituitary. So we kind of have this anterior posterior lobes, and we want to talk about how neurons from the hypothalamus are related to the posterior and anterior lobes. Now, the posterior lobe I always start with because it's a little easier to discuss. Is basically a stray shot of neurons secreting hormones from the posterior lobe. So, let me give you some landmarks here. This is the mammillary body. We're not concerned with it, but they always illustrate it in these figures. Mammillary body. Concerned with smell, not concerned with it. This is the optic chiasm where cranial nerve 2 crosses. Optic chiasm. Okay. You know, there's one cluster of cell bodies, and in physiology they call those clusters nuclei, a cluster of cell bodies. There's one called the supraoptic nucleus. Supraoptic nucleus. I'm going to draw a cell here, a cell body. It's a neuron. I'm going to draw the cell body right there above the optic chiasm. The name of the nucleus is SON. There's a bunch of them. I'll just draw one cell, but there's a bunch of cells. SON is supraoptic nucleus. The cells in that nucleus will secrete the hormone. Let's see here. Let me go to the right page of my notes first. It secretes the hormone ADH. So these cells secrete ADH. So in my illustration, know that ADH, it's made in the cell body. Right? So my little green dots are ADH, but you have to have a way to carry it to the posterior lobe, because that's where it will be secreted into. Let's remember that hormones are secreted into the blood, right? Now, what you may not know is that blood flows in one direction. And the normal passage of blood flows, it goes through arteries, capillaries, and veins. And then veins return blood back to the heart and blood circulates. So you have to secrete it into a capillary bed in this region. So I want to draw a capillary bed. I want to draw a little arteriole that's going to feed oxygen-rich blood to this area. So blood's going in, bloodstream, and it's going to branch out into smaller capillary beds. Capillaries are the blood vessels that can pick things up. So I always draw capillaries as these little kind of crosshatches because they're super small and super dense. And I want to draw half of it red and half of it blue to illustrate gas exchange. Oxygen for CO2. We'll get more into that later. But anyways, those are my little capillary bed. Half red, half blue. So blood is flowing in and blood flows out through the venous side. Okay? So the goal is to get the ADH, you're dehydrated or whatever, and you got to get it from there to here. So do you remember the name of the special process called the axon? It's going to go down all the way there. And it's gonna, from the axon terminal, it'll secrete ADH into our capillary bed. And it'll be swept away into our bloodstream. And remember what it targets. It targets the kidney tubules. Okay, well anyways. So that's one nucleus. So now you know how ADH gets into the bloodstream. All right, so are there any questions on that? There's another nucleus I want you to know. I abbreviate PVN. Paraventricular nucleus. They secrete the hormone. Cells in this nucleus secrete the hormone oxytocin. I'll teach you the function of oxytocin later. Just focus on how it gets into the bloodstream. There are 4 brain ventricles. There's 2 lateral ones, and there's a third, and there's a fourth. The third one is in this location, because this is the hypothalamus. Remember how there's one between the 2 thalamus? Well, anyways, this is close to that brain ventricle. So paraventricular nucleus refers to cells close to that brain ventricle. So there's the cell body. It makes oxytocin, and again, you send an axon down the infundibulum, right? And you secrete oxytocin into the bloodstream if you need it. So ADH, oxytocin, those are the secretions of the posterior lobe. It's a straight shot, a straight secretion from hypothalamus into the posterior lobe. So the posterior lobe is just kind of like a launching point for those hormones. They're made by the cell bodies up in the hypothalamus. Okay. Well, there's another name, if you can believe it. Basically, this class is just knowing what the names are. Spend my whole life figuring out what the names are. Anyways, this tract of neurons has a name. It's called the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract. It's a tract of axons. That's a fill in the blanker on the test, and it's a tough one for you to memorize. It's a very 2 long words. Let me write it down for you. So know the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract. It's a tract of axons, all right? It's using that infundibulum as a structure to get from point A to point B, so you can, launch the hormones into the bloodstream. Hypothalamic, obviously it refers to those 2 structures. Hypophyseal refers to the pituitary, and hypothalamic refers to that region. So what we say is, this is a direct neural connection between hypothalamus and posterior lobe. That's why it's called pars nervosa, a direct neural connection, quote unquote. So any questions on that? All right, well then let's talk about this other picture here. Let me show you the picture real quick, and then I'll go back to our drawing. We'll add to it. Okay, this one here. So now we're talking about how the hypothalamus controls the anterior lobe. It's a vascular connection. There's a couple of portal veins there. Okay, well let me explain what that all means. To make sure we're all on the same page, I want you to know how blood circulates normally, then how this is unusual. Okay? Okay, so let's call this general blood circulation. It's systemic circulation. So you have the heart. Let's draw a simple illustration here. Right? That's how we always symbolize the heart. Hearts really don't look like that to me. You know, we'll study it. But anyways, artery, as you well know, the heart pumps blood, and arteries away. Okay, so blood is pumped away from the heart in arteries. That rule is always true. Remember it. Arteries away. And arteries distribute blood to every cell in your body, and you have to branch out into smaller and smaller and smaller branches. Let me just be simple. So let me draw a capillary bed here, like I drew before. Arteries, capillaries, veins, back to the heart. Let's say you're an endocrine gland, and you want to secrete your hormone into the bloodstream at this location. So I'll draw an endocrine gland, and the hormones get into the bloodstream, and they're swept away in venous blood. And so the veins return blood to the heart so it can recirculate. They call it the spent blood because you've already had the gas exchange. So the spent blood is returned to the heart. Just remember, vein in. It returns blood to the heart. And, okay, well, then what? Then that hormone, it's got to reach its target, but it's swept away in venous blood, so it's going back to the heart. Okay, so the heart's got to repump it out the artery and distribute it in the bloodstream everywhere. And it's got to find its target. Let's say its target is, I'll just put a capillary bed here if you don't mind. There's another capillary bed, another vein back there. So let's say the target is right here, target cell. And that green hormone, distribute in enough amounts, eventually will find its target. And that's how hormones normally work. They have to get diluted in the entire systemic circulation, but it usually works okay that way. Okay. Now, wouldn't it be better if you had a shortcut? What if you put a vein straight from cat bed 1 to cat bed 2? Call this cat bed 1, capillary bed, you know, I'm being capillary cat bed 1, call this cat bed 2. Wouldn't it be great if you had a vein to go straight from 1 to 2? Straight shot, right there. So there, in this example, you can have the gland secrete its hormone right into the, this is called a portal vein, this shortcut vein. And the hormone goes straight from cat bed 1 to cat bed 2, undiluted. It gets there much more efficiently. Wouldn't that be better? Say yes, it's better. And that's what this is. Okay, yeah. So that's kind of why I wanted to like illustrate this, so you can appreciate that just a little bit more. So, any questions on systemic circulation, regular variety versus the shortcut? Do you see why it's a shortcut? Normally, it's arteries, capillaries, veins, back to the heart, and repeat. This, what's the blood flow? Capillary, vein, capillary. That's the shortcut. Write that down. Capillary, vein, capillary. That's a shortcut. You don't go back to the heart. You go straight from one capillary bed to the other one. And you get to your target undiluted. You're not diluted by systemic circulation. So let's call this portal circulation. In portal circulation, hormones are not diluted by general systemic circulation. Are not diluted by systemic circulation. You get to your target much quicker. There's actually only 3 examples of this in human physiology. This is one of them. Another one is in digestion, and the third one is in kidney. And we'll get to them. But anyways, in this one, the portal veins are right there. So what I see in this picture is I see the oxygen-rich blood here, the red. So look at cat bed 1. The fancy way to say cat bed 1 is primary capillary plexus. That's what it says in the book. You can say cat bed 1. So you see, okay, yes, no question. Is there gas exchange here? Yes. So you go to portal vein. No, it's all blue spent blood. Realize there's no such thing as blue blood. It's just an illustrative purpose way to illustrate deoxygenated blood. This capillary bed, cat bed 2, is all blue. Why? Gas exchange occurred here. There's no more gas to exchange. It's all equilibrated. But anyways, the point of this capillary bed is you're delivering a straight shot of the tropic hormones. Okay? So let's kind of draw this part out. So there's another set of nuclei. We'll draw it over here. This nucleus, there's different names, and I've looked them up. They're varied. You don't got to know the names. All you got to know is that these cells secrete tropic hormones. These neurons secrete tropic, spelled tropic, hormones. So it helps to table this out. All the hormones. And it's a lot of information, but how about no size? Not on the first day. Come on, it's only the first day. You can sigh on like the last week. We just start now. Let's try to be, I know it's a lot of information, but you guys can handle it. Okay, so there's a lot of different secretions from cells in these nuclei, but they're all tropic hormones. So I'll list them as in a column here. We'll just put HYP. So for the tropic hormones from here, we'll call HYP. The first one I'll mention is called thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH. And know that we're going to talk about how it stimulates cells in the anterior pituitary. I'll just make a column for ant pit cells. And I'll make a third column for ant pit hormones that are secreted. Well, anyways, let's talk about TRH. It's made here. It's made here, and somehow you got to get it into the bloodstream. Okay. So, thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH, is right here, following here. Okay, so there's an axon. It's going to go right around there. And it's going to release TRH into cap bed 1. Right here. So I'm going to draw a cap bed 1 right around here, the infundibulum region. So remember, it goes oxygen-rich blood coming in. And we'll draw half a capillary bed, red, and the other half blue. So, cap bed 1. I'll just put a 1. I'm kind of busy here. 1 for cap bed 1. TRH is secreted into this portal system. So TRH gets into there. Remember, this is a hormone that will stimulate the release of another hormone. Those cells that it needs to stimulate are right here. You're almost there. So it's like you just gotta like send a portal vein to this capillary bed. All blue. No, I'm not going to fill it in. I'm just going to draw this big blue circle and draw a vein going right to it. So I'm going to draw some cells in there. So here's my TRH, right? It's going to stimulate specific cells in the ant pit called thyrotropes. I'm just going to draw a cell. And I'm going to name it over here. This hormone will stimulate thyrotropes. And so imagine TRH stimulating the thyrotropes to release a hormone called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which we know before. So secreted by the thyrotropes. And TSH will be swept away by venous blood. There's another vein coming out. So TSH is one of the secretions of anterior pituitary. And it does things after this, but we'll just stop there. Okay, so let's kind of back it up. So what I did was, I told you how, in this example, how the hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary. It's not a direct neural connection, is it? It uses a vascular connection. It uses the portal system to control it controlled it by this tropic hormone up here, right? And that which was secreted into our portal system. CAPED1, portal vein, PV for portal vein, and CAPED2. So whenever you are asked to define a portal system, always define it that way. Capillary, vein, capillary. Okay, because remember that is what is different about this. Now there are other secretions of that we have to go through. For example, corticotropin releasing hormone. CRH. So it's the same thing. It's secreted here. It uses the capillary, CAPED1, portal vein, CAPED2. And let me even draw another cell. Another cell that is stimulated by CRH are corticotropes. So CRH will stimulate corticotropes. And then corticotropes will secrete ACTH. And ACTH in our drawing is secreted right here. From the corticotropes in the anterior pituitary. There's a few more here. Gonadotropin, and I'm just going to abbreviate it RH, gonadotropin RH. Full abbreviation is G_nRH. And that is a tropic hormone secreted by the hypothalamus that will stimulate cells called gonadotropes. So I'll draw a third cell in here to illustrate that GnRH is stimulating gonadotropes in the ant pit, which will then secrete FSH-LH. The gonadotropins that will target the ovaries and the testes. So I'll add those to the picture there. So you got cells that secrete ACTH, you got cells that secrete FSH/LH. A couple more. There are hormones called prolactin inhibiting hormone. You can call it PIH. If you read about it in the book, books now call it dopamine. It's been identified as that molecule. Dopamine. Or prolactin releasing hormone. Anyways, this kind of dual control will either inhibit or stimulate cells called lactotropes. For a nursing mother, if the lactotropes are stimulated, it'll secrete the hormone prolactin. So I'll draw another cell to illustrate that the lactotropes are in the anterior pituitary, and when they're stimulated by PRH, they will release prolactin, PRL. So don't confuse the acronyms, they're like a letter off, PRL, PRH, kind of a thing. Just keep those straight when you use abbreviations. Now, the most significant hormone is growth hormone. There's growth hormone releasing hormone, there's growth hormone inhibiting hormone. growth hormone. Growth hormone releasing hormone. Well, you can abbreviate that capital GHRH, all caps, and there's growth hormone inhibiting hormone. GHIH. Both of those will stimulate or inhibit somatotropes. All of these tropes means cell. All of these tropes or cells, again, are in the amphibia. So I'll even draw another cell here to illustrate that somatotropes, which are actually 50% of all the cells in the anterior pituitary, when they're stimulated by GHRH, they'll secrete growth hormone, the hormone of your youth. I'll tell you more about its function later. Growth hormone. A lot of secretions for the anterior pituitary, and it's important to talk about all these tropic hormones. So we use the term tropic hormone, before the break. So look at all of the hormones, if you're taking notes, I hope you are, in this column here. Wouldn't you agree that they're all tropic? All of them. They control the release of another hormone. They either release it or inhibit it. These are all tropic. Tropic, 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 tropic. Most of these are tropic as well. Okay, we'll talk about what they do to other hormones later. Tropic, tropic. These last two, you can call them not tropic, they're direct action. This goes to the breast, this goes right to other things to stimulate growth. Okay, well anyways, I put check marks next to the tropic ones. Okay, so this whole thing, I know it took a while because there's a lot of hormones. This portal system is called a vascular connection. The portal system is called a vascular connection. I'm going to pull this down. Now, the physiology of all those anterior pituitary hormones, which are here, I'll teach it the next time, but let's kind of just review what we took notes on. So we got this left column of hormones and this right column of hormones, as you look at it left to right. These these neurons here, which do they secrete, on the left or on the right?
The left.
On the left. Now, I do ask that on the first exam in the written portion, but I got to tell you, that is the toughest one for you to get right. It's tough to remember all these hormone names. And when I ask you, what do these secrete, it's hard to remember these. So just know that. You might need to spend a little more time studying those names. Okay, that's a tough one. Okay, well anyways, the tropic hormones, they use this vascular connection right here. They get to all the cells here, and we named them, right? And then they secrete all these hormones there. It's a vascular connection. Now the physiology of all those hormones, I guess I'll get to next time, but just to give you a preview, I'm not going to ask you on your half sheet today, but see when you study this tonight, and I recommend you study every night, see if you can answer these questions with different artwork for the anterior and posterior lobe at the end of the talk there. What I think I should do now, looking at the clock, is I should start to introduce the lab. You have some paperwork for you to